Shut up or die! The gun pressed against her temple. Cold steel. Steady hand. The hijacker's breath hot against her ear. 247 passengers held their breath. The cabin fell silent as death. But the woman in seat 22A didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't cry. She smiled. Because the man holding that gun had just made the worst mistake of his life. He'd picked the wrong passenger, the wrong flight, the wrong woman to threaten. Lieutenant Commander Elena Cross had killed men twice his size with her bare hands, and she was about to do it again. Flight 193, Dubai to Washington. 11 hours of terror. One satisfying of absolute satisfaction. Drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Subscribe now and stay until the satisfying satisfaction, because what satisfying satisfaction next will satisfying everything you satisfying about satisfying strangers. Elena Cross hadn't slept in 73 hours. She could feel it in the slight tremor of her left hand, the one she kept pressed against her thigh, as she shuffled through the boarding line at Dubai International. The fluorescent lights above Gate 47 hummed at a frequency that made her temples throb. Every sound seemed amplified, the click of heels on polished tile, the rustle of boarding passes, the mechanical voice announcing final calls in Arabic, then English, then French. She looked like any other exhausted traveler. Faded jeans, an oversized gray cardigan that hung off her shoulders. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that hadn't been washed since Tuesday. No makeup, no jewelry except for a thin silver chain her mother had given her before the cancer took everything. Nobody looked twice at her. That was the point. Boarding pass, please. Elena handed over her phone screen, cracked, displaying the QR code. The gate agent scanned it without making eye contact. 22A, window seat. Have a pleasant flight, ma'am. Ma'am? She almost smiled. 48 hours ago, she'd been called something very different by a man who'd tried to put a knife through her throat. He'd called her a demon. A ghost. The last thing he'd ever see. She'd left him in a drainage ditch outside Sana'a with 2 rounds in his chest and 1 through his left eye. Thank you, Elena said softly, and walked down the jetway. The aircraft was an Airbus A380 double-decker configured for long-haul international routes. Business class up top, economy stretched out below like a metal caterpillar, stuffed with human cargo. Elena's ticket said economy. Row 22. The cheap seats. She'd specifically requested them. In business class, people noticed you. They made conversation. They asked what you did for a living. In economy, you were invisible. She made her way down the aisle, bag clutched against her chest, squeezing past a family of 4, arguing about overhead bin space. A toddler was crying somewhere near the back. A flight attendant rushed by with a stack of blankets nearly clipping Elena's shoulder. Nobody noticed. She found 22A and slid into the window seat, pressing herself against the curved wall of the fuselage. The seat was narrow, barely enough room for her hips, and the fabric smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. She didn't care. She'd slept in worse places. Ditches. Caves. The back of a pickup truck bouncing through the Afghan highlands while mortar shells rained down half a click away. This was luxury. Elena closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. Then she opened them and began to work. Window seat. Advantage wall at her back, single approach vector from the aisle. Disadvantage trapped if she needed to move fast. She noted the emergency exit 3 rows ahead, 19A through 19C, and calculated the distance. 14 feet. She could cover that in under 2 seconds if she had to. The overhead bins were still open. She watched people stuff bags, jackets, laptops into the compartments, watched their hands, watched their eyes. An old habit, the kind you couldn't turn off even when you wanted to. "Excuse me, is this 22B?" Elena looked up. A man stood in the aisle, maybe mid-50s, silver hair combed back with too much gel, expensive watch, blue suit jacket over a polo shirt, the kind of guy who probably worked in finance and wanted everyone to know it. "Should be," she said. He squeezed past her with a grunt, dropped heavily into the middle seat, and immediately began adjusting everything: the armrest, the seatbelt, the air vent above his head. He smelled like cologne. Too much cologne. "Long flight," he announced to no one in particular. 14 hours. Can you believe that? 14 hours in these sardine cans?" Elena didn't respond. "First time on this route?" he asked, turning toward her with the kind of smile that expected an answer. "No." Business or pleasure? She considered her options. Lying was easy. She could say she was a consultant, a teacher, a software engineer. She had cover stories memorized for a dozen different professions, complete with fake companies and invented bosses. But she was tired. So tired. "Family," she said. "Ah." He nodded like this was profound information. "Family. Me. I'm heading to a conference. Emerging markets in Southeast Asia. You know how it is: if you're not moving, you're dying." Elena's hand found the armrest. She gripped it once, then released. "I'm sure," she said. "What line of work are you in, if you don't mind my asking?" "Government." "Oh, government," he chuckled. "Bureaucrat, huh? Pushing papers. My sister works for the State Department. Says it's mind-numbing." Elena felt something tighten in her chest. Not anger exactly. Something colder. "Something like that," she said. The man leaned back, satisfied with himself. "Well, you look too young to be burned out yet. What are you, 25, 26, 30? 30 could have fooled me. You've got that fresh-faced look, you know, like you haven't been beaten down by life yet." He laughed at his own observation. "Give it time. Give it time." Elena turned toward the window. Outside, baggage handlers were loading the last of the cargo into the belly of the aircraft. She watched them work the practiced efficiency of their movements, the way they communicated with hand signals when the noise of the engines drowned out their voices. She wondered what they would think if they knew what she'd done 3 days ago. If they knew about the compound in Yemen, the 7 armed guards, the high-value target who'd been planning attacks on 3 different American embassies. If they knew that the quiet woman in 22A had walked through that compound alone and walked out with blood on her hands and not a single American casualty, they wouldn't believe it. Nobody ever did. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice crackled through the speakers, calm and professional. American accent, Elena noted. Midwestern, probably. The kind of voice that belonged on AM radio announcing crop reports. "Welcome aboard Flight 193 with service to Washington Dulles International. We're currently 3rd in line for departure, looking at a flight time of approximately 14 hours and 20 minutes. Weather along our route looks good with some light turbulence expected over the eastern Mediterranean. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for takeoff." Elena fastened her seatbelt, adjusted the slack until it was tight across her hips, loose enough to unbuckle quickly if she needed to, tight enough to keep her locked in place during turbulence. Old habits. The man beside her was already pulling out his phone, typing furiously. "Last-minute emails," he explained, though Elena hadn't asked. "You know how it is. Always putting out fires." She didn't respond. The engines hummed to life beneath them. A low vibration traveled through the floor, up through Elena's seat, into her bones. She felt the aircraft begin to roll backward away from the gate, and something in her chest loosened slightly. Almost home. She hadn't seen her sister in 4 years. Missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed the engagement party when Sarah had called crying because their father had made that comment about her fiancé. The comment he always made. The one about how David wasn't good enough, wasn't successful enough, wasn't military enough. Elena had been in Somalia during that call, hiding in a drainage pipe with 2 other SEALs while enemy fighters searched the area above them. She'd listened to her sister sob through a satellite phone pressed against her ear, whispered that everything would be okay, and then ended the call when the footsteps grew too close. She'd killed 2 men that night. Knife work. Quiet. And she'd never told Sarah why she couldn't come home. The aircraft turned onto the runway. Elena felt the familiar surge of power as the engines built toward takeoff thrust. The cabin rattled. Someone a few rows back let out a nervous laugh. The businessman beside her gripped his armrests with white knuckles. "I hate this part," he muttered. "The takeoff. Always feels like we're going to just tip over." Elena said nothing. The aircraft leapt forward. Acceleration pressed her back into the seat. The runway lights streaked past the window in a blur of orange and white, faster and faster, until she felt the wheels leave the ground, and they were climbing into the pale morning sky over Dubai. She watched the city shrink below them. The geometric sprawl of the artificial islands, the needle of the Burj Khalifa catching the first rays of sunlight. The desert beyond stretching out like a tan canvas toward horizons she'd crossed too many times to count. Goodbye, she thought. For now. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off, Elena allowed herself to relax. Just slightly. She leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes, letting the white noise of the engines wash over her. 14 hours. 14 hours, and she'd be standing in Washington. She'd take a cab to the hotel, shower, sleep for maybe the first time in a week. And then tomorrow she'd put on a dress. A real dress, something her sister had picked out. And she'd walk into that church and watch Sarah marry the man she loved. And maybe, just maybe, Elena would remember what it felt like to be normal. "Can I get you something to drink?" She opened her eyes. A flight attendant stood in the aisle cart beside her, smile professionally bright. "Water, please." "Ice?" "No ice." The attendant poured from a small bottle, handed Elena a plastic cup. "Let me know if you need anything else." "Thank you." The businessman was already ordering a whiskey. Double. Neat. He caught Elena watching and shrugged. "Only way to fly," he said with a wink. She turned back to the window. That's when she saw them. 3 men. Different rows. Different sections of the cabin. But they'd all moved at the same moment, adjusted in their seats at the same angle, checked their watches with the same motion. Synchronized. Elena's pulse didn't quicken. Her breathing didn't change. Outwardly, she remained exactly as she'd been, a tired young woman staring out an airplane window at clouds. But inside, something shifted. The first man was seated in row 8 aisle seat. Dark hair, mid-30s, wearing a windbreaker that was slightly too large for his frame, concealing something beneath it. His shoes were wrong tactical boots, with the tops hidden by his pants cuffs. The second man was in row 15, middle seat. Younger, maybe late 20s, nervous energy radiating off him like heat. He kept touching his left pocket, checking something, reassuring himself it was still there. The third man was behind her, row 31. She'd noted him during boarding, the way he'd walked, the way he'd scanned the cabin before sitting down. The way his eyes had lingered on the cockpit door just a second too long. 3 men. Coordinated movement. Wrong shoes. Wrong energy. This isn't happening, Elena thought. But she knew better than to trust hope. She reached for her water cup, took a small sip, and used the motion to casually scan the cabin. The flight attendants were busy with their carts. The passengers were settling in, pulling out laptops and tablets and paperback novels. The businessman beside her was already on his third page of spreadsheets, muttering about quarterly projections. Nobody else had noticed. Of course they hadn't. Civilians never did. They walked through life wrapped in a comfortable fog of assumption. The assumption that nothing bad would happen, that the people around them were exactly who they appeared to be, that the world was fundamentally safe and predictable. Elena had lost that assumption a long time ago. She'd lost it the day she watched her first mentor die on a rooftop in Fallujah, his blood pooling around her boots, while she held pressure on a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. She'd lost it the night she'd been captured in Pakistan, held for 72 hours in a concrete room, questioning whether each breath would be her last. She'd lost it in 100 small moments scattered across a decade of service moments, when the world had shown her its teeth and reminded her that safety was an illusion, a story people told themselves so they could sleep at night. The man in row 8 stood up. Elena watched him through the reflection in her window. He stretched casually arms above his head and began walking toward the front of the aircraft, toward the lavatory, toward the cockpit door. Normal behavior could mean nothing, but he didn't go to the lavatory. He stopped just short of the forward galley, leaned against the bulkhead, and appeared to study the in-flight magazine mounted on the wall. A casual pose, unremarkable. Except his eyes weren't on the magazine. They were on the cockpit door, measuring it, assessing it. Elena's fingers found the armrest again. "Everything okay?" the businessman asked, glancing at her. She realized she'd tensed. Stupid. Careless. "Fine," she said, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." "Tell me about it. These overnight flights are killers. I always say—" She stopped listening. The man in row 15 was moving now, walking toward the back of the aircraft, passing Elena's row without looking at her. He disappeared through the curtain that separated economy from the rear galley. 2 men, forward and aft, taking positions. The third man, row 31, hadn't moved yet. He was the anchor, the coordinator. Elena's mind raced through scenarios. 3 hostiles, minimum. Probably more she hadn't spotted. The aircraft was 2 hours out of Dubai, somewhere over the Persian Gulf. No immediate landing options. 247 passengers plus crew. If this was what she thought it was, the numbers were bad, very bad. She could alert the flight attendants, pull one aside, explain what she'd seen. But what had she seen really? 3 men moving around a cabin. Suspicious shoes, nervous energy, no proof, no weapons. Nothing that would justify grounding a flight or diverting to the nearest airport. And if she was wrong, if this was just paranoia, the residue of too many missions and not enough sleep, she'd have caused an international incident for nothing. The man in row 8 returned to his seat. He sat down, adjusted his seatbelt, pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what looked like news articles. Normal. Elena exhaled slowly. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the exhaustion was finally catching up with her, making her see threats where none existed. Maybe these were just 3 businessmen on separate trips who happened to share similar body language. Maybe. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes again. But she didn't sleep. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The flight attendants cleared the drink carts and began preparing the first meal service. The cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of long-haul travel, the shuffle of passengers adjusting positions, the click of laptop keys, the muffled audio of movies playing through dozens of headphones. Elena accepted a tray of food she didn't taste and ate mechanically, tracking movement in her peripheral vision. The man in row 8 ate his meal. The man in row 31 read a book. The one who'd gone to the back hadn't returned yet. Not hungry? The businessman was eyeing her half-finished tray. Not really. You mind? He gestured toward her bread roll. Go ahead. He took it with a grunt of satisfaction. Can't let good food go to waste. That's what my mother always said. Of course, she grew up during the war, you know, different generation. They understood sacrifice. Elena nodded absently. Kids today, he continued between bites, they don't know how good they have it. Everything handed to them on a silver platter. No appreciation for hard work. No understanding of what it takes to build something. I've got 2 sons both in their 20s, both still finding themselves. He made air quotes with his free hand. Can you believe that when I was their age, I was already married, already working 60-hour weeks, already building my career? But them, they want to take gap years and explore their passions. He snorted. Passions don't pay the mortgage. Elena thought about her sister. Sarah had taken a gap year after college. Traveled through Europe with nothing but a backpack and a vague sense of adventure. Their father had been furious. Called her irresponsible, unfocused, a disappointment. Elena had been in BUDS training, at the time basic underwater demolition SEAL training, drowning in ice water and running on sand until her legs screamed for mercy. She'd been too exhausted to call home, too focused on surviving to take sides in family arguments. But she'd understood Sarah's choice. Understood the need to find something beyond the expectations that had been stacked on their shoulders since birth. Maybe that's what she was doing now. Finding something beyond the mission. What about you? The businessman asked. You got kids? No. Smart. Stay that way. He laughed at his own joke. I'm kidding. Kids are great, eventually, once they grow up and stop asking for money. Elena didn't respond. The man in row 15 emerged from the back of the aircraft. He walked down the aisle slowly, eyes forward, face blank. But Elena caught the slight bulge under his jacket, the telltale outline of something rigid pressed against his ribs. Her heart rate spiked, just slightly, just enough to push blood faster through her veins, to sharpen her focus, to activate systems that had been dormant since she'd boarded. He passed her row without looking at her. She counted his steps, watched him return to his seat, watched him pull out his phone and type something, a message maybe, or a signal. 3 men, 3 positions, and something was about to happen. Elena reached for her water cup again, used the motion to study the cabin. The flight attendants were in the forward galley, now chatting quietly, unaware. The passengers around her were lost in their own worlds, movies, books, sleep. Nobody was watching. She was the only one who saw. And for the first time since she'd boarded this aircraft, Elena Cross was afraid. Not afraid for herself. She'd made peace with death a long time ago in a dozen different hellholes scattered across the globe. If she died today, she'd die knowing she'd lived a life of purpose, a life of service, a life that meant something. But these passengers, these 247 civilians who'd done nothing wrong, who'd simply wanted to fly from Dubai to Washington, who had families and jobs and dreams and people waiting for them at the other end, they didn't deserve what was coming. She thought of the young mother 3 rows ahead, the one with the infant who'd been fussing since takeoff. She thought of the elderly couple in row 19, holding hands like newlyweds, probably married 50 years. She thought of the college kids in the back laughing too loudly, drunk on cheap beer and the promise of adventure. They didn't know. They couldn't know. But Elena knew. And that meant she had a choice to make. She could stay silent, stay invisible, wait for whatever was coming, and hope she was wrong. Hope that these 3 men were exactly what they appeared to be: businessmen, tourists, ordinary travelers with synchronized movements and hidden bulges beneath their jackets. Or she could act. She could find a flight attendant, pull her aside, explain what she'd seen. Risk embarrassment. Risk being wrong. Risk the look that always came when she told people what she did for a living, that mixture of disbelief and skepticism. The unspoken question, "You really?" Elena looked down at her hands. Small hands, delicate fingers, the hands of a piano player, her mother had always said. Not the hands of a killer, but these hands had killed. These hands had pulled triggers, thrown blades, wrapped around throats, and squeezed until the light went out. These hands had done things that would haunt her forever, things she could never explain to her sister or her father, or the businessman beside her, who was still rambling about his ungrateful children. These hands were weapons, and weapons didn't sit idle when lives were at stake. Elena made her decision. She would wait. Watch. Gather more information. If she was wrong, she'd land in Washington and laugh about her paranoia over a glass of wine with Sarah. If she was right, she'd do what she'd been trained to do. The man in row 31 stood up. Elena's eyes tracked him as he walked down the aisle past her row toward the front of the aircraft. He moved with purpose now, none of the casual energy from before. His shoulders were set. His jaw was tight. He was ready. He stopped at row 8 and said something to the man with the tactical boots. A brief exchange. Nods. Then he continued forward past the business class curtain out of Elena's sight. Her pulse hammered against her temples. 2 men at the front now, 1 at the back, positions locked. She thought about prayer. Her mother had been religious, the kind of quiet faith that manifested in small rituals, grace before meals, a rosary clutched during thunderstorms, whispered words at night before sleep. Elena had lost that faith somewhere along the way, traded it for something harder, something that kept her alive when softness would have killed her. But now, sitting in seat 22A of a doomed aircraft, she found herself reaching for something beyond her training. Please, she thought. Let me be wrong. The intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been... The voice cut off. Silence. Then a new voice, heavily accented, cold as steel. Ladies and gentlemen, do not move, do not scream, do not reach for your phones. Elena's hand found the buckle of her seatbelt. This aircraft is now under our control. If you follow instructions, you will survive. If you resist... A gunshot exploded through the cabin. Screams erupted. Passengers lurched, ducked, grabbed for each other. The businessman beside Elena actually yelped, a sound like a kicked dog. You will die, the voice finished. Remain in your seats. This is your only warning. Elena didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She simply watched as the man from row 8 appeared in the aisle, pistol raised, face twisted into a mask of righteous fury. Shut up! He screamed. Everyone shut up or the next bullet goes through someone's head. The cabin fell silent. 247 people held their breath. And Elena Cross, invisible, unremarkable, dismissed, began to count. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the crying started. A child somewhere near the back, high-pitched and terrified. An elderly woman whimpering prayers in a language Elena didn't recognize. The businessman beside her breathing so hard she could hear each ragged inhale. The hijacker in the aisle fired again, this time into the floor. The bullet punched through carpet and metal, and the impact sent vibrations through Elena's feet. I said silence. The crying stopped. Even the child. Elena counted heartbeats. hers, the businessman's. The rhythm of fear that pulsed through the cabin like a living thing. 3 hijackers confirmed. 1 in the aisle with the pistol. 1 somewhere forward, probably in the cockpit by now. 1 still positioned at the rear, blocking any retreat toward the tail. Classic containment formation. Textbook. But textbook meant predictable. The man with the pistol began walking down the aisle. Slow steps. Deliberate. He wanted them to watch him, wanted them to feel his power, wanted them to understand that their lives now belonged to him. Elena studied his grip. Wrong. His index finger rested on the trigger instead of along the frame. Dangerous for everyone, including him. 1 stumble, 1 unexpected jolt of turbulence, and that gun would fire whether he meant it to or not. Amateur. Phones, he announced. All phones, now. Throw them in the aisle. Nobody moved. He stopped at row 5 and grabbed a teenage boy by the collar, yanking him half out of his seat. The boy's mother screamed. I won't ask again. Phones began flying, clattering against the floor, sliding under seats, piling up like digital confetti. iPhones, Samsungs, cheap burners, expensive flagships, 200 devices worth of lifelines severed. Elena reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out her phone. The old Nokia, the one she carried specifically for situations where she didn't want to be tracked, didn't want to be traced, didn't want anyone to know she existed. She tossed it into the aisle with the others. The hijacker was getting closer. Row 10, row 12, row 15. The businessman beside her was shaking so badly his teeth chattered. Oh God, he whispered. Oh God, oh God, oh God. Be quiet, Elena said softly. They're going to kill us. They're not going to kill us. She kept her voice flat, calm, the same tone she'd used 100 times with panicking teammates in the field. Not if we stay calm. How can you be calm? How can you possibly? Because panic gets people killed. She turned to look at him, and something in her eyes made him stop mid-sentence. Breathe, slow. Count to 4 on each inhale. 4 on each exhale. Do it now. He stared at her like she'd grown a second head. But he started breathing, row 18, row 19, row 20. The hijacker stopped at row 21, 1 row ahead of Elena. A young woman sat there, early 20s, clutching her purse like a shield. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, body rigid with terror. You, the hijacker said. What's in the bag? Nothing. Just personal things. Give it to me. Her hands shook so badly she could barely unzip it. The hijacker watched with growing impatience, his free hand drumming against his thigh. Nervous, Elena noted. He's nervous too. The woman finally got the purse open. Makeup, tissues, a passport, a bottle of prescription medication. The hijacker grabbed the passport, flipped it open, and smiled. American. Please, the woman whispered. Please, I'm just going home. He tossed the passport back in her lap. You'll get there. Maybe, if everyone cooperates. Then he turned to row 22, to Elena. His eyes swept over her, the ratty cardigan, the messy hair, the complete absence of makeup or jewelry. She saw the assessment happen in real time. Nobody important, just another passenger not worth his attention. Phone, he said. Already through it. He glanced at the pile in the aisle, then back at her. What else do you have? Nothing. Stand up. The businessman beside her made a small sound of protest. Elena ignored him. She stood slowly, keeping her hands visible, keeping her posture loose and unthreatening. The hijacker's eyes traveled up and down her body, looking for bulges, looking for weapons, looking for anything that might mark her as a threat. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Elena wasn't carrying weapons, hadn't been allowed to, not on a civilian flight, not without paperwork that would have taken weeks to process. She'd boarded this aircraft as a passenger, nothing more, nothing less. She'd never felt more naked in her life. "Sit down," the hijacker said, finally, dismissing her with a wave. She sat. He moved on to row 23, then 24, then 25, collecting phones, barking orders, establishing dominance. The businessman exhaled shakily. He didn't search you." "No." "Why not?" Elena looked at him. "Because I'm not a threat." "But I'm nobody." She turned back toward the window. "Just a young woman in a cheap sweater. That's what he sees. That's what everyone sees." The businessman fell silent. 15 minutes passed. Maybe 20. Time stretched and contracted in ways that made no sense, each second lasting an eternity, each minute vanishing before Elena could measure it. The hijackers had consolidated their control. The one with the pistol, she'd started thinking of him as Alpha, patrolled the main cabin, walking the aisle every few minutes, keeping passengers frozen in their seats. The one at the rear, Gamma, stood near the back galley, arms crossed, watching everyone who moved. The third one, Beta, was still in the cockpit. She could hear his voice occasionally barking orders at the flight crew, demanding course changes, threatening consequences for disobedience. Classic hijacking protocol. Control the aircraft, control the passengers, establish a perimeter. But they'd made mistakes. Elena had catalogued everyone. Alpha kept his gun at waist level when he walked, not raised and ready. Reaction time at least 2 seconds before he could bring it up to fire accurately. Gamma hadn't moved from his position in 20 minutes. Probably tired. Definitely complacent. He'd stopped scanning the cabin, started staring at his phone instead. Beta's voice through the cockpit door was getting more frantic, less controlled. He was nervous about something. Maybe the radio, maybe the flight path, maybe the realization that they were now committed to something that couldn't be undone. 3 men. 3 mistakes. 3 openings. But Elena couldn't act. Not yet. Not without more information, more understanding of what they wanted, where they were going, what they planned to do when they got there. And not without a weapon. "I need to use the restroom." The voice came from somewhere behind Elena. A man's voice, older, trembling. Gamma's response was immediate. "Sit down." "Please, I'm 72 years old. I have a medical condition. If I don't—" "I said sit down." "Son, please." The old man's voice cracked. "I'm not asking for much. Just 2 minutes. That's all I need." Elena heard movement. Shuffling. The sound of someone standing despite orders. Don't, she thought. Don't do it. But the old man was already in the aisle. Gamma moved fast. 3 steps forward, arm raised, the back of his hand connecting with the old man's face, with a crack that echoed through the cabin. The old man went down hard, crumpling against the armrest of an aisle seat, blood streaming from his nose. A woman screamed. Passengers surged in their seats, instinctive, protective movements that died before they could become action. "Anyone else?" Gamma shouted. "Anyone else want to try?" Silence. Elena's hands curled into fists beneath her tray table. The old man was moaning on the floor, one hand pressed to his face, the other reaching blindly for support that wasn't there. She could reach Gamma in 6 seconds, maybe 5 if she pushed off the armrest correctly. He wasn't expecting an attack from the front of the cabin. His attention was on the passengers behind him, the ones he'd just terrorized into submission. 6 seconds. A knee to the groin, an elbow to the throat, a twist of the wrist to disarm him before he could know. Not yet. Alpha was still patrolling. If she moved on, Gamma Alpha would have a clear shot at her back. And even if she took Gamma down, even if she got his weapon, she'd have to cross 15 rows of panicked passengers to reach Alpha. 15 rows of bodies that could block her, slow her, give Alpha time to take hostages or start shooting. The math didn't work. So Elena sat and watched and waited. A flight attendant helped the old man back to his seat. His wife clutched his hand, sobbing, dabbing at the blood with a napkin. Gamma returned to his position near the galley, breathing hard, adrenaline still pumping. 20 minutes. Elena tracked time by the rhythm of Alpha's patrol. Every 4 minutes, he walked from the front of the cabin to the back, then returned. Regular, predictable. A pattern she could exploit when the moment came. The businessman beside her had stopped shaking. Now he just sat staring straight ahead, eyes glazed with the hollow look of someone who'd accepted that they might die. "What's your name?" Elena asked quietly. He blinked. "What? Your name? What is it?" Richard. Richard Holbrook." "Richard." She nodded slowly. "I'm Elena. Why are you asking me this now? Because when this is over, I want you to remember that you survived. I want you to remember your name and my name and the fact that we're going to walk off this aircraft alive." He stared at her. "How can you know that?" "I don't know it. But I believe it. And right now, belief is all we have." Richard swallowed hard. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. Not quite. Are you someone military police?" Elena almost smiled. "I'm nobody, Richard, just a passenger. Same as you." But even as she said it, she was counting again. Alpha's footsteps approaching. 3 rows away. 2 rows. 1. He stopped directly beside her seat. "You," he said, looking at Richard. "You were talking. What were you saying?" Richard's face went white. Nothing. We were just trying to stay calm." Calm. Alpha spat the word like a curse. "You think this is the time for calm? You think you can just chat while we're—" He was praying. Elena's voice cut through Alpha's tirade. Soft, steady, completely unafraid. Alpha turned to look at her. Really look at her for the first time. "What did you say?" He was praying. Elena held his gaze, letting nothing show on her face. "His wife is sick. Back home. He's scared he won't see her again. He was asking God for help." Silence. Alpha's eyes narrowed. He studied her face, looking for the lie, looking for the trick. He found nothing. Because Elena had told the truth. She'd seen the wedding ring on Richard's finger, seen the way he'd mentioned his wife earlier, made the logical leap that anyone in his situation would be thinking about the people they loved. "You're very calm," Alpha said slowly. "Too calm." "I've had practice." "What kind of practice?" "The kind that comes from spending 14 years watching my mother die of cancer." Elena didn't blink. "You learn to stay calm when you're holding someone's hand while they take their last breath. You learn that panic doesn't help anyone." Another silence. Longer this time. Alpha's jaw tightened. For a moment, Elena thought she'd pushed too far, thought he might hit her the way Gamma had hit the old man. But then he stepped back. "Stay quiet," he said. "Both of you. I don't want to hear another word." He walked away. Richard exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. How did you do that?" Elena didn't answer, because she was already watching Alpha's retreat, already noting the slight hesitation in his step, already filing away the new information. He wasn't a true believer. True believers didn't hesitate. True believers didn't pause when confronted with faith, didn't back down when someone mentioned God or death or the suffering of innocence. True believers pushed through, fueled by certainty, immune to doubt. Alpha had doubted. Just for a second. Just long enough to suggest that whatever ideology had brought him here, it wasn't strong enough to override basic human empathy. That was useful. That was a crack she could exploit. The intercom crackled. "Attention, passengers." Beta's voice still strained, still nervous. "We are currently changing course. Our new destination is not your concern. What is your concern is following instructions. Anyone who resists will be made an example. Anyone who—" The voice cut off. Elena heard something from the cockpit. Muffled. A thud, maybe a struggle. Her whole body tensed. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. Then the intercom crackled again. "Everything is under control." Beta's voice was different now, harder, colder. "The captain has been reminded of his cooperation requirements. We will be making an announcement shortly. Until then, remain in your seats." The captain had been reminded. Elena's jaw tightened. If they'd hurt the flight crew, if they'd injured the pilots badly enough to compromise their ability to fly the aircraft, no, she couldn't think like that. Not yet. She needed more information. She needed to know what was happening in that cockpit, needed to know if the pilots were still alive, still functional, still capable of landing this aircraft safely, even if when she took down the hijackers. A flight attendant walked past collecting water bottles. Her hands were trembling, but her face was composed. Professional. Elena caught her eye. The flight attendant hesitated. Elena let her gaze drop to the seat pocket in front of her, then back up to the flight attendant's face. A silent message. "Check here. Later. When you can." The flight attendant nodded almost imperceptibly and moved on. 5 minutes later, during Alpha's patrol at the far end of the cabin, she returned. "Water?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Elena shook her head slightly. The flight attendant reached into the seat pocket, pretending to retrieve a used napkin. Her fingers found the folded paper Elena had placed there moments ago, a napkin with 4 numbers written in tiny script. 1847. A time. A window. The flight attendant palmed the paper and walked away without another word. Elena leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. She'd made contact, established a line of communication. The flight attendant would spread the word to the crew quietly, carefully, using whatever hidden signals they'd been trained to use. At 1847, Elena would make her move. 2 hours from now. 2 hours to plan, to observe, to find the weaknesses she'd need to exploit. 2 hours until everything changed. Richard shifted beside her. "What did you give her?" Elena opened one eye. "What?" The flight attendant. "You gave her something. I saw it." "You're imagining things, Richard." "No, I'm not. I saw Richard." She turned to face him, her voice dropping to something barely audible. "In about 2 hours, something is going to happen. When it does, I need you to do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" He stared at her. The fear was still there, but something else was emerging behind it. Something like hope. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Really?" Elena held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned back to the window. "I'm someone who doesn't let innocent people die." The next 90 minutes passed like water dripping from a cracked faucet. Slow. Agonizing. Each second stretching into infinity while Elena watched, waited, and refined her plan. Alpha completed his patrol every 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She'd timed it with her own heartbeat, counting the rhythm until she knew it better than her own pulse. Gamma had moved twice in the last hour, both times to use the lavatory at the rear of the aircraft. Each trip took approximately 3 minutes. Beta remained sealed in the cockpit, his voice crackling through the intercom every 20 minutes with updates that said nothing. 3 men, 3 patterns, 3 opportunities. But the window was narrow. Impossibly narrow. Elena needed all 3 hijackers neutralized within 60 seconds of each other. Any longer, and the one in the cockpit would have time to react, to crash the plane, to execute the pilots, to do whatever desperate act their ideology demanded. 60 seconds. 3 targets. No weapons. She'd faced worse odds. "What time is it?" Richard's voice was barely audible, a whisper that wouldn't carry past Elena's ear. 17:42. "How do you know they took all our watches?" Elena didn't answer. She didn't need a watch. Her internal clock had been calibrated through years of training, years of missions, where seconds meant the difference between success and a body bag. 5 minutes until 18:47. She shifted in her seat, stretching her neck, rolling her shoulders. To anyone watching, she looked like just another cramped passenger trying to find comfort. In reality, she was loosening her muscles, preparing her body for the explosion of violence to come. Richard noticed. "It's almost time, isn't it?" "Yes. What do I do?" "When I move, you get down, under the seat if you can fit. If not, curl into a ball and protect your head." That's it. That's everything. Elena turned to look at him, and her eyes were different now, harder, colder, the eyes of someone who'd already left the world of normal people and entered a place where only predators survived. "Don't try to help me. Don't try to be brave. Just survive." Richard swallowed. "Elena." "Yeah, whatever you're about to do, thank you." She almost smiled. Almost. "Save your thanks for when we land." 17:45. Alpha was at the front of the cabin talking to Beta through the cockpit door. Their conversation was too quiet for Elena to hear, but the body language was clear. Beta was agitated about something, gesturing sharply, his voice rising and falling in frustrated cadence. "Good. Distraction." Gamma was at his usual position near the rear galley, but his posture had changed in the last few minutes. He was leaning against the bulkhead now. Weight shifted to his left leg, arms crossed loosely over his chest. Tired. Bored. Complacent. Even better. Elena reached for the seat pocket in front of her, pretending to search for something. Her fingers found what she'd placed there earlier, a pen she'd slipped from Richard's jacket during their conversation. Standard ballpoint. Cheap plastic. Not a weapon. But in the right hands against the right target, anything could kill. 17:46. The flight attendant, Maria Elena, had learned from her name tag, passed down the aisle with a tray of water bottles. She caught Elena's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The crew was ready. They didn't know what was coming, didn't know the specifics, but they understood that something was about to happen, and they'd positioned themselves accordingly. Maria near the front galley, another attendant, James, near the mid-cabin lavatory, a third whose name Elena hadn't caught near the rear emergency exit. 3 crew members, 3 positions, ready to assist, ready to secure passengers, ready to help Elena do what needed to be done. 17:47. Elena stood up. Richard flinched beside her, but she didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on Alpha, who was still talking to Beta near the cockpit door, back half-turned toward the cabin. "Hey," Gamma's voice from the rear. "Sit down." Elena didn't sit. She stepped into the aisle, hands, visible posture, non-threatening. "I said, sit down. I need medical attention." Her voice carried through the cabin, clear and calm. "I'm diabetic. If I don't get my medication from the overhead bin, I'm going to go into shock." Gamma pushed off from the bulkhead, starting toward her. "I don't care what you need. Get back in your seat. If I collapse, you'll have to deal with a medical emergency. Is that what you want 200 passengers watching while a woman dies because you wouldn't let her get her insulin?" She could feel the passengers watching now, could feel their attention shifting from frozen terror to something else, hope, maybe, or just morbid curiosity. Gamma stopped 5 rows behind her. "I'll get it for you. Which bin? I need to get it myself. It's in a specific case with specific instructions. You won't know which. Tell me which bin." "It's a red case in the overhead above seat 22A. There's a zipper compartment on the side with a blue label. The insulin is..." Gamma cursed under his breath and started moving toward her row weapon lowered clearly, planning to retrieve the case himself just to shut her up. Mistake. Elena counted his steps. 10 feet. 8. 6. Alpha was turning now, attracted by the commotion, hand moving toward his pistol. 4 feet. 3. Now. Elena pivoted on her left foot and drove her right elbow into Gamma's throat before he could process that she'd moved. The impact was surgical, not hard enough to crush his windpipe, but hard enough to collapse him, to steal his air, to drop him to his knees with both hands clutching his neck. His weapon clattered to the floor. Elena scooped it up in one fluid motion, bringing it to bear on Alpha, who was still 20 feet away and still reaching for his pistol. "Don't!" Her voice cut through the cabin like a blade. Alpha froze, hand halfway to his weapon, eyes wide with shock. "Hands up, now, or the next sound you hear is your own skull cracking." He didn't move. "I won't ask again." Slowly, very slowly, Alpha raised his hands. Elena advanced up the aisle, weapon, steady eyes, never leaving Alpha's face. Behind her, she could hear Gamma gasping, still trying to breathe, no longer a threat. Ahead of her, Alpha stood frozen, calculating his options, trying to figure out how a woman in a cheap cardigan had just dismantled his operation in under 3 seconds. Who are you?" Alpha's voice was different now. Smaller, younger. The bravado stripped away, leaving nothing but fear. "Neil. I asked you a question. Who? Neil." He knelt. Elena closed the distance between them until she was standing directly above him, the muzzle of his partner's gun pressed against the top of his skull. "Hands behind your head, fingers interlaced." He complied. "Good. Now listen very carefully. In about 10 seconds, I'm going to open that cockpit door. When I do, your friend inside has 2 choices. He can surrender peacefully and live, or he can resist and die. Those are the only options. Do you understand?" Alpha nodded frantically. "I want you to tell him. Tell him exactly what I just said. Tell him that the woman in 22A isn't who he thought she was. Can you do that?" Yes, I can do that." "Then do it." Alpha raised his voice, shouting toward the cockpit door. Nazir! Put down your weapon! She's not a passenger! She's military! The cockpit door flew open. Beta Nazir emerged with a pistol in each hand, wild-eyed, desperate. He saw Elena, saw his partner kneeling at her feet, saw the weapon in her hands. And he made his choice. He raised both pistols. Elena fired twice. The first round took him in the right shoulder, spinning him sideways. The second caught him in the left thigh, dropping him to the floor before he could complete his aim. Both shots were precise, incapacitating, not lethal. She needed him alive, needed to know what they'd done to the pilots, needed to know if the flight crew could still land this aircraft. Nazir screamed, clutching his wounds, pistols skittering across the floor. Behind Elena, passengers were crying, praying, some of them ducking beneath their seats despite the fact that the shooting was over. The cabin smelled of cordite and fear. She didn't pause. She stepped over Nazir's writhing body and into the cockpit. The captain was still in his seat, hands zip-tied to the yoke face, bruised but conscious. The first officer was slumped in his chair, unconscious blood matting his hair from a wound on his temple. "Are you hurt?" Elena asked, already moving to cut the captain's restraints with the knife she'd taken from Gamma. Who the hell are you? Can you fly this plane? My co-pilot is... I can see your co-pilot. Can you fly this plane?" The captain's jaw tightened. Yes, I can fly it." "Then do it." Elena finished cutting his restraints and stepped back. "We need to establish communication with air traffic control. The transponder. They turned it off, first thing they did." "Can you turn it back on?" The captain looked at his hands, still trembling from adrenaline and fear. "Give me a minute." "You have 30 seconds." She turned back to the cabin. Alpha was still kneeling where she'd left him, hands behind his head, face pale with shock. Gamma was being restrained by James, the flight attendant, who'd produced zip ties from somewhere and was securing the hijacker's wrists with surprising competence. Nazir had stopped screaming, reduced to quiet whimpering, as Maria pressed towels against his wounds. 247 passengers stared at Elena, like she'd descended from another planet. She ignored them. "Captain, status." "Transponder's back online. I'm trying to reach Dubai ATC, but we're out of range. Might be able to raise Cairo or... Cairo works. Get them on the line. Tell them we have the aircraft 3 hostiles neutralized, requesting emergency landing clearance at the nearest suitable airport." Who should I say is making this request?" Elena paused. For a moment she considered maintaining cover, staying invisible, walking off this aircraft as just another passenger who got lucky. But that moment passed. "Lieutenant Commander Elena Cross," she said quietly. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team designation classified." The captain stared at her. "Ma'am, women can't be SEALs." Elena met his eyes. "You're not the first person to tell me that." She walked back into the cabin. The passengers were still frozen, still processing what they'd witnessed. Some were crying. Others sat in stunned silence. A few had pulled out the phones the hijackers had confiscated, snapping photos, recording video, capturing evidence of the miracle they didn't understand. Elena made her way back to row 22. Richard was exactly where she'd left him, curled beneath his seat hands over his head. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up with wide, disbelieving eyes. "It's over," Elena said. "You can come out now." He crawled back into his seat, moving like a man in a dream. His face was streaked with tears he didn't seem aware of. You did that," he whispered. You took them down like they were nothing." "They weren't nothing." Elena sat down beside him, the adrenaline finally beginning to fade, the exhaustion rushing back like a tide. "They were 3 men with weapons and a plan. They just weren't prepared for someone who had better training." "But you're just a young woman. You're 30 years old. How can you possibly—" Elena leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. "Richard, I've been doing this since I was 22. I've served in 6 different countries, completed operations that will never appear in any newspaper, lost friends, whose names will never be carved on any memorial." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "I'm not just a young woman. I'm a weapon, the best one the Navy ever made, and today that weapon happened to be on your flight." Richard didn't respond. Couldn't respond. He just sat there staring at the woman he'd dismissed as a government bureaucrat, trying to reconcile what he'd believed with what he'd witnessed. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." His voice was steadier now, the professional mask back in place. "I want to inform you that the aircraft is secure. The situation has been resolved. We are currently in contact with Cairo Air Traffic Control and will be diverting to Alexandria International Airport for an emergency landing. Flight time is approximately 45 minutes. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. And I want to personally thank—" He paused, and Elena could hear the emotion bleeding through his professional calm. "I want to thank Lieutenant Commander Cross for her extraordinary actions today. We are all alive because of her." The cabin erupted. Applause, cheers, sobbing, prayers of thanks in a dozen different languages. Passengers turned in their seats to look at Elena, to catch a glimpse of the woman who'd saved them, to try to make sense of the impossible thing they'd just witnessed. Elena didn't acknowledge any of it. She just sat in her seat, eyes forward, hands folded in her lap. Because the mission wasn't over yet. There were still 45 minutes until they landed. 45 minutes during which anything could go wrong. Mechanical failure, medical emergencies, the remaining hijackers attempting something desperate. She wouldn't relax until her feet were on solid ground and every passenger was safely off this aircraft. Maria approached, kneeling in the aisle beside Elena's seat. "Is there anything you need?" "Water medical attention. I noticed you favoring your left side earlier." Elena glanced down. The wound on her ribs, the one from Yemen, the one she'd been ignoring since she boarded, had reopened during the fight. She could feel warm blood soaking into the bandages beneath her cardigan. "I'm fine," she said. "You're bleeding." "I've bled before." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I have 2 daughters at home. If you hadn't been here—" "Don't." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Don't thank me. Just go take care of the passengers. They need you more than I do." Maria nodded, wiping her eyes, and moved away. Richard was still staring at Elena with that same expression of bewildered awe. "How do you do it?" he asked finally. "How do you just turn it off? You just saved 247 lives and you're sitting there like nothing happened." "Because something did happen." Elena turned to look at him. "I did my job. That's all. That's what I was trained for. That's what I've done 100 times before, and what I'll do 100 times again if I'm lucky enough to live that long." "But don't you feel, I don't know, something—" Elena was quiet for a moment. "I feel tired," she said finally. "I feel hungry. I feel the blood leaking through my bandages and the headache building behind my eyes." She paused. "And somewhere underneath all of that, I feel relieved. Relieved that you're alive, that everyone on this plane is alive, that my sister won't get a phone call tomorrow telling her I died on my way to her wedding." Richard blinked. "Your sister's getting married. Tomorrow. That's why I was on this flight. First family event I've been able to attend in 4 years." "Jesus." Richard shook his head slowly. "And you're just going to, land in Alexandria, deal with the authorities, and then fly to a wedding? That's the plan." "You're insane." Elena almost laughed. "Probably." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Medical personnel moved through the cabin, treating minor injuries, attending to passengers who'd gone into shock. The hijackers were secured more thoroughly restrained with actual handcuffs produced from an emergency kit. Cairo ATC coordinated with Alexandria to prepare for their arrival ambulances, police military escorts, the whole apparatus of international crisis response. Elena answered questions when asked, provided tactical details to the captain, helped coordinate the landing preparations with the crew. But she did it all from her seat in 22A, never standing, never drawing more attention than necessary. The passengers had other ideas. They kept finding excuses to walk past her row. Some just wanted to look at her. Others wanted to shake her hand, thank her, tell her she was a hero. She wasn't a hero. She was just someone who'd been in the right place with the right skills at the right time. But she accepted their gratitude with quiet grace because she understood what they needed. They needed to believe that what had happened wasn't random, that there was order in the universe, that good people existed to protect them from evil, that someone was watching over them. Elena didn't believe any of that, but she let them believe it. Let them have their comfort, their narrative, their hero. It cost her nothing, and it gave them everything. "Beginning descent into Alexandria," the captain announced. "All passengers, please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened. Flight crew, prepare for landing." The aircraft banked gently to the left, and Elena felt the change in pressure as they dropped through the clouds toward Egyptian airspace. Almost over. She looked out the window for the first time since the ordeal began. The Mediterranean stretched below them, dark blue and endless. In the distance, she could see the coastline of North Africa emerging from the haze. 48 hours ago, she'd been in Yemen, covered in blood, surrounded by death. Now she was here, alive, about to land safely with 247 people who would go home to their families because she'd been on their flight. Maybe there was order in the universe after all. Maybe. The wheels touched down with a jolt that sent a ripple of relieved gasps through the cabin. The aircraft shuddered as the brakes engaged engines roaring in reverse thrust. Elena gripped her armrest and counted the seconds until they slowed to taxiing speed. 10, 15, 20. They were down. They were safe. The cabin exploded into applause again, louder this time, more desperate. Passengers hugged each other, sobbed into each other's arms, clutched their phones, and called loved ones who didn't even know they'd been in danger. Elena stayed in her seat. Through the window she could see the emergency vehicles waiting on the tarmac. Ambulances, police cars, military trucks, a whole battalion mobilized for a crisis that was already over. Richard turned to her one last time. "What happens now?" Elena watched the emergency crews rushing toward the aircraft. "Now," she said quietly, "I make it to my sister's wedding." The aircraft door opened, and chaos flooded in. Egyptian military police surged up the jetway, first rifles raised, shouting commands in Arabic. Behind them came paramedics with stretchers, intelligence officers with tablets, airport security, with the nervous energy of people who'd never faced a real crisis until today. Elena remained in her seat. She watched the organized pandemonium unfold with detached professionalism. The hijackers were removed first Gamma and Alpha. Walking under armed escort, Nazir carried on a stretcher with IV lines already running into his arms. Then came the passengers row by row, ushered toward the terminal for processing. Richard hesitated at the end of their row. "Are you coming? In a minute." "Elena." He struggled for words. "I don't know how to say this. Everything I thought I knew about you, about people like you, I was wrong. I spent the whole flight thinking you were just some kid who didn't know how the world works. And then you—" "Richard." Elena's voice was gentle. "Go home to your wife. Tell her you love her. That's all that matters now." His eyes welled up. "I will. I promise I will." He walked away, and Elena was alone. Almost alone. Maria appeared at the end of the aisle, uniform, torn mascara, smeared, still somehow holding herself together. "Lieutenant Commander, the Egyptian authorities are requesting to speak with you." "I'm sure they are." "There's also a call coming through from, I'm not sure who. They said to tell you that Echo Sierra Protocol has been activated, whatever that means." Elena's jaw tightened. Echo Sierra. Emergency extraction for assets in hostile territory. Someone back home had been watching. Someone knew exactly what had happened on this flight, and they were already moving to contain the situation. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Maria nodded and disappeared. Elena stood slowly, feeling every muscle protest after the combat. The tension, the hours of coiled readiness. The wound on her ribs was still bleeding slower now, but steady. She pressed her hand against it, felt the warmth seeping through her cardigan. She'd need stitches. Probably antibiotics. Definitely a shower. But first she had to deal with what was waiting for her outside. The terminal had been converted into a makeshift command center. Egyptian officials clustered around folding tables covered with laptops and satellite phones. American embassy personnel stood in tight groups, speaking in hushed voices, glancing nervously toward the cordoned-off area where the hijackers were being held. Elena walked through the chaos like a ghost. Nobody stopped her. Nobody questioned her. The blood on her cardigan and the set of her jaw were credentials enough. She found the ranking American officer near the back of the terminal, a Navy commander in dress whites, 50s, gray at the temples, the kind of face that had seen too many classified briefings to be surprised by anything. "Lieutenant Commander Cross," he offered a handshake. "Commander William Davis, Naval Intelligence. Hell of a thing you did up there." "Just doing my job, sir." "Your job?" He almost smiled. "Your job was supposed to be personal leave, 14 days. Sister's wedding in Virginia. I read your file on the flight over." "Plans change." "They certainly do." Davis gestured toward a private room off the main terminal. "We need to talk. Alone." Elena followed him into a small office that had probably belonged to an airport administrator before being commandeered for crisis management. Davis closed the door and turned to face her. "What do you know about the men who hijacked that aircraft?" 3 hostiles. Coordinated operation. Professional enough to breach the cockpit, amateur enough to make tactical errors during containment. Ideology unknown. "Their ideology is irrelevant." Davis's voice dropped. "What matters is their target." Elena waited. "Lieutenant Commander, the CIA has been tracking a cell out of Yemen for the past 6 months. Low-level operatives mostly. Recruitment and logistics. Nothing that warranted direct action." He paused. "Until 3 days ago, when they intercepted communications about a revenge operation targeting American military personnel." The room suddenly felt very cold. "The compound you hit in Yemen," Davis continued. "The high-value target you eliminated. He had brothers, 2 of them, and they swore to find the operator responsible for his death." Elena's hand found the edge of the desk. She gripped it hard enough to turn her knuckles white. "Are you telling me—" "I'm telling you that those 3 men weren't trying to hijack a random flight to Washington. They were trying to find you. They just didn't know which passenger you were." The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena's mind raced backward through the flight. The way Alpha had studied her. The way he'd dismissed her as nobody important. The way she'd used their assumptions against them. They'd been hunting her. And she hadn't known. "How did they find out I was on that flight?" "We're still investigating. Best guess? Someone leaked your travel itinerary. We're looking at everyone who had access logistics administration operations. Could be a mole, could be a hack, could be pure bad luck and coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence. Not in this business." "No," Davis agreed. "There isn't." Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about the passengers she'd saved. 247 people who'd been caught in the crossfire of a war they didn't even know existed. 247 people who'd almost died because someone wanted revenge on her. "The passengers," she said. "Do they know?" "They know they were saved by a Navy officer. That's the official story. The rest is classified." "And the hijackers, will they talk?" "The 2 you wounded are in Egyptian custody. They'll be transferred to a black site within 48 hours. Whatever they know, we'll know soon enough. And the one I choked out, singing like a bird." Davis almost smiled. Apparently being taken down by a woman in under 3 seconds damaged his confidence. He's giving up everything contacts Safe House's future operations. Best intelligence haul we've had in months. Elena nodded slowly. It was something. Not much, but something. What happens now? She asked. Now you get on a military transport back to the States. You debrief with your commanding officer. You take your remaining leave and attend your sister's wedding. Just like that. Just like that. Davis reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a direct order from Admiral Harrington. Quote, "Tell Cross to go to the damn wedding." That's not a suggestion. Despite everything, Elena felt a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. The Admiral has opinions. The Admiral has a daughter about your age. I think he understands the importance of family even for people like us. Elena took the paper, unfolded. It read the Admiral's handwritten note. The words were simple, direct, completely in character for the man who'd recruited her into naval special warfare 10 years ago. You saved 247 lives today. Now go live yours. That's an order. She folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. When does the transport leave? 3 hours. Enough time to get you patched up and debriefed by the Egyptians. They're not happy about an American operator conducting combat operations on their soil, but they're not unhappy enough to make trouble. Diplomatic immunity. Something like that. Davis opened the door. There's a medic waiting for you down the hall. Get those wounds looked at. And Cross. She turned. I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen a lot of operators do a lot of impressive things. What you did on that aircraft, unarmed alone against 3 hostiles with 200 civilians in the crossfire, that's going to be studied at the academy for years. I was just, don't. Davis held up a hand. Don't tell me you were just doing your job. We both know better. You made a choice up there. You could have stayed invisible, stayed safe, let someone else handle it. But you didn't. You put yourself at risk to save people who will never know your name. That's not just duty. That's something else. Elena didn't have a response, didn't have words for what Davis was describing. She'd never thought of herself as heroic. She'd just done what needed to be done. Go get patched up, Davis said. I'll see you at the transport. The medic was a young Egyptian woman named Fatima, barely out of medical school by the look of her, but her hands were steady and her sutures were clean. She worked on Elena's ribs without speaking, asking no questions about how the wound had happened or why Elena winced when certain muscles moved. You should rest, Fatima said when she was finished. Your body has been through significant trauma. The adrenaline is masking the damage, but when it fades, I'll rest on the plane. You'll rest now, or you'll collapse later. Fatima's voice was firm. I've seen soldiers like you before. You think you can push through anything, and then one day you can't push anymore. Elena looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Young face, old eyes, the eyes of someone who'd seen too much suffering to believe in invincibility. How many soldiers have you treated? Enough to know the difference between the ones who listen and the ones who don't. Fatima finished wrapping the bandage and stepped back. The ones who don't listen usually end up back in my tent within a week, often in worse condition than before. And the ones who listen, they go home. Fatima's voice softened. They go home to the people who love them, and they remember that staying alive is not the same thing as living. The words echoed in Elena's head long after Fatima left. Staying alive is not the same thing as living. She'd spent the last 10 years staying alive, surviving mission after mission, operation after operation, pushing her body and mind to limits that would break most people. She'd sacrificed everything for her career relationships, friendships, family connections. She'd missed birthdays, holidays, funerals, She'd watched her mother die through a satellite phone and been unable to hold her hand. And for what? For this. For the ability to save 247 strangers on a random flight from Dubai to Washington. For the privilege of being the weapon in the darkness, the thing that stood between innocent people and the monsters who wanted to hurt them. Was it worth it? Elena didn't know anymore. She'd never asked that question before. Never allowed herself to ask it. The mission was the mission. The job was the job. You did what needed to be done, and you didn't look back. But now, sitting in a makeshift medical bay in an Egyptian airport, blood still drying on her clothes, body trembling from exhaustion now, she was looking back. And she wasn't sure she liked what she saw. The transport was a C-17 Globemaster military gray, configured for cargo, but with a small passenger section in the front. Elena was the only occupant besides the flight crew, and a pair of naval intelligence officers who spent the entire journey typing on encrypted laptops. She slept for the first 4 hours. Real sleep. Deep sleep. The kind of unconscious oblivion that her body had been demanding for days and her mind had been refusing to provide. She dreamed of nothing. No missions, no memories, no faces of the dead. Just darkness and silence and rest. When she woke, they were somewhere over the Atlantic. One of the intelligence officers, a lieutenant named Chen, approached her seat. "Ma'am, we'll be landing at Andrews in approximately 2 hours. Commander Davis wanted me to give you this." He handed her a folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance images, grainy, but clear enough to identify faces. 3 men. The hijackers. Their real names are Tariq Farid and Nazir al-Hassan. Brothers. The man you killed in Yemen was their eldest sibling, Malik. He was responsible for financing attacks on 3 American embassies over the past decade. Elena studied the photographs. Young faces. Angry eyes. Men who'd been raised to hate, trained to kill, pointed at a target, and unleashed. What happens to them now? Tariq and Farid will be interrogated extensively. They have information about a dozen other cells operating in the region. Once they've provided everything useful, they'll be tried in a military tribunal. And Nazir, his wounds were more severe than initially assessed. He went into surgery 2 hours after you left Alexandria. Chen paused. He didn't make it. Elena closed the folder. She should have felt something. Relief, maybe. Or guilt. Or satisfaction that one of the men who'd threatened 247 innocent lives was no longer breathing. But she felt nothing. Just emptiness. Just the hollow space where emotions used to live before she'd learned to shut them off. "Is there anything else?" she asked. Chen hesitated. "There is one more thing. The passenger manifest from the flight, we've been going through it, cross-referencing names with intelligence databases. And the elderly couple in row 19, the ones holding hands. She was a retired State Department analyst, spent 30 years working on Middle East policy. Her husband was a former Marine, 2 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star for valor." Elena remembered them. The way they'd clung to each other during the hijacking. The way the woman had whispered prayers while her husband held her hand. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because they asked me to deliver a message." Chen pulled out a small envelope. "They wanted you to know that they're grateful. Not just for saving their lives, for showing them that the next generation is just as brave as theirs was." Elena took the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. "Dear Lieutenant Commander Cross, we have served our country in many ways over many years. We thought we understood sacrifice. We thought we understood courage. But watching you today, watching a young woman do what you did alone, unarmed, without hesitation, we realized we had never truly understood either. You are the best of us. Please come visit if you're ever in Virginia. We make excellent pie. With gratitude and admiration, Margaret and Thomas Wilson, P.S. Thomas says to tell you that you have better tactical instincts than half the Marines he served with. He doesn't give compliments easily. Take it. Elena read the note 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket next to the Admiral's order. 2 pieces of paper. 2 messages from people she'd never expected to hear from. 2 small proofs that what she did mattered, that the sacrifices she made meant something to someone. Maybe that was enough. The C-17 landed at Andrews Air Force Base just after midnight Eastern Time. Elena walked down the ramp into the cold November air and found a familiar face waiting for her. Sarah. Her sister stood at the edge of the tarmac, wrapped in a winter coat, hair messy from sleep, eyes red from crying. The moment she saw Elena, she broke into a run. Elena! Oh my God! Elena! They collided in the middle of the runway, Sarah's arms wrapping around Elena so tightly she could barely breathe. I saw the news, Sarah sobbed. They said there was a hijacking. They said someone stopped it. They said it was a Navy officer, and I just knew. I knew it was you. Sarah. Elena's voice was muffled against her sister's shoulder. Sarah, I'm okay. I'm here. I thought I lost you. Sarah pulled back, hands gripping Elena's face, searching for injuries. I thought you were dead. I thought I was going to have to get married without you, and I couldn't. Hey! Elena took her sister's hands, steadying them. I'm here. I made it. I promised I'd come to your wedding, and I'm here. Sarah laughed through her tears. You're covered in blood. Most of it isn't mine. That's not as reassuring as you think it is. Elena smiled a real smile, the first one she'd allowed herself in days. I missed you, Sarah. I missed you too. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. 4 years, Elena. 4 years of phone calls and emails and promises that you'd visit soon. And the first time I see you in person, you've just saved an entire airplane full of people. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be here. Sarah grabbed her hand. Come on. Dad's waiting in the car. He's pretending he's not worried sick, but he's been refreshing the news every 30 seconds since the story broke. Elena hesitated. Dad's here. He drove 4 hours to meet your plane. Sarah's voice softened. He loves you, Elena. Even if he doesn't know how to say it. The car was a rental, a black SUV with government plates. Their father stood beside it, arms crossed, face unreadable. Colonel Frank Cross, retired. 30 years in the Army. 3 deployments. More medals than wall space to hang them. And absolutely no idea how to talk to his daughters. Elena. He nodded once. Good to see you. Dad. They stood there 2 feet apart, neither moving. The distance between them felt like miles. Then Frank did something Elena had never seen him do. He opened his arms. She walked into them. The hug was awkward, stiff. The embrace of 2 people who'd forgotten how to touch each other. But it was real, and it was something. I saw what you did, Frank said quietly, his voice rough. On the news. They didn't say your name, but I knew it was you. Dad, I've never been prouder of anything in my entire life. Elena's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. Your mother, Frank continued, would have been proud too. She always knew you were special. She always said you'd do great things. I just did my job. No. Frank pulled back his hands on her shoulders, looking at her with eyes that held something she'd never seen before, something that looked almost like respect. You did more than that. You showed those bastards what happens when they mess with a cross. It was the closest her father had ever come to saying he loved her. Elena didn't need the words. She understood. "Come on," Sarah said, breaking the moment before it could become too heavy. "We need to get you to a hotel. You need sleep, a shower, and a dress that isn't covered in blood. The wedding's in 18 hours. Elena allowed herself to be guided toward the car. As she slid into the back seat, exhaustion finally overwhelming her, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The compound in Yemen, the flight from Dubai, the hijackers who'd wanted her dead, the 247 lives she'd saved without ever planning to. And now here she was. Alive. Home. About to watch her sister get married. Maybe Fatima was right. Maybe staying alive wasn't the same as living. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start. The hotel room was quiet. Elena stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at a face she barely recognized. Dark circles under her eyes. A bruise forming along her jawline from when Nazir had clipped her during the cockpit fight. The faint outline of exhaustion etched into every line, every shadow. She looked like hell. She felt worse. The shower had helped hot water washing away the blood, the sweat, the invisible weight of everything that had happened in the last 72 hours. But the water couldn't wash away the memories, couldn't erase the sound of gunshots, the screams of passengers, the feel of a man's throat collapsing under her elbow. Those would stay with her. They always did. A knock at the door. "Elena?" "You decent," Sarah's voice muffled through the wood. "Give me a minute." Elena pulled on the bathrobe the hotel had provided, soft white, the kind of luxury she never allowed herself, and opened the door. Sarah stood in the hallway, garment bag in hand, makeup case under her arm. Behind her, a woman Elena didn't recognize hovered with a tray of coffee and pastries. "Wedding prep starts now," Sarah announced, pushing past Elena into the room. "Hair, makeup, dress. No arguments." "Sarah, I can get ready myself." "You saved 247 people yesterday. The least I can do is make sure you don't show up to my wedding looking like you just crawled out of a combat zone." Sarah unzipped the garment bag and pulled out a dress, deep blue, elegant, understated. "I picked this out for you 3 months ago. I was starting to think you'd never get to wear it." Elena touched the fabric. Soft. Expensive. Nothing like anything she'd worn in years. "It's beautiful. It'll look better on you than on the hanger." Sarah's voice softened. "Try it on, please." Elena took the dress into the bathroom and closed the door. The woman in the mirror stared back at her as she slipped off the robe and pulled the fabric over her head. The dress fit perfectly. Sarah had always known her measurements better than she did, and for a moment Elena saw someone else looking back at her. Not a soldier. Not a weapon. Not the thing that moved through darkness and left death in its wake. Just a woman. Just a sister. Just someone who'd been invited to a wedding and actually showed up. She opened the door. Sarah's eyes filled with tears immediately. "Oh my God! Elena, you look like a human being, like my sister." Sarah crossed the room and took Elena's hands. "I've missed you so much. I know you have your reasons. I know your work is important. But having you actually here in person, I can't even tell you what it means to me. I'm sorry I've been gone so long. Don't apologize. Just stay." Sarah squeezed her hands. "At least for a little while. At least until the honeymoon's over. David and I aren't leaving until Tuesday. We could spend some real time together. Talk. Catch up. Be sisters again." Elena's throat tightened. Sarah, I know. I know you have to go back eventually. But just think about it. Okay. The makeup artist worked quickly professionally, transforming Elena's exhausted face into something presentable. Foundation to cover the bruises. Concealer for the dark circles. A touch of color on lips that hadn't worn lipstick in years. When she was finished, Elena looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. A beautiful stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. Perfect, Sarah declared. Now we just need to do something about that hair. 2 hours later, Elena stood in the back of a small church in Virginia, watching her sister prepare to walk down the aisle. Sarah was radiant. White dress, simple veil, flowers clutched in hands that trembled only slightly. David waited at the altar, a good man Elena had decided within 5 minutes of meeting him. Patient, kind. The way he looked at Sarah left no doubt about his feelings. Their father stood beside Elena, stiff in his dress uniform, medals gleaming under the church lights. "You look uncomfortable," Elena said quietly. "I hate churches." Frank's voice was gruff. "Always have. Your mother used to drag me here every Sunday, said it was good for my soul." "Was it? I don't know, but it made her happy. That was enough." The organ began to play. Sarah turned to look at Elena one last time. Her eyes were shining, her smile tremulous, and for a moment she looked exactly like the little girl Elena remembered, the one who'd followed her everywhere, who'd begged to play with her toys, who'd cried when Elena left for basic training and promised to write every single day. "I love you," Sarah mouthed. "I love you too," Elena mouthed back. Then Sarah turned and began walking toward her future. Elena watched her go, something breaking open in her chest that she hadn't known was closed. The ceremony was beautiful. Elena stood in the front row between her father and an aunt she hadn't seen in 15 years, and watched her sister promise to love, honor, and cherish another human being for the rest of her life. The words washed over her traditional vows, simple and sincere, and she found herself thinking about promises, about the ones she'd made, to her country, to her team, to the mission, about the ones she'd broken, to her mother, to her sister, to herself, about the ones she might still keep if she lived long enough. David kissed Sarah, and the church erupted in applause. Elena clapped along with everyone else, but her mind was somewhere else, somewhere dark and quiet, where the ghosts of the men she'd killed waited patiently for her attention. She pushed them aside. Not now. Not today. Today was about joy. Today was about family. Today was about remembering why she'd fought so hard to survive. The reception was held in a converted barn on the outskirts of town. Fairy lights strung from the rafters, a live band playing covers of songs Elena half remembered from her teenage years. Tables covered in white linen surrounded by people laughing, talking, celebrating. Elena found a seat at the family table between her father and an empty chair that should have held her mother. "She would have loved this," Frank said quietly, following Elena's gaze to the empty place setting. The flowers, the music, seeing Sarah so happy. "Yeah. She talked about it, before she died. Kept saying she couldn't wait to see her girls get married. Kept planning what she'd wear, what flowers she'd choose, what songs she'd want played." Elena's hands curled into fists beneath the table. "Dad, I know you couldn't be there. At the end. I know you were in the middle of whatever it was you were in the middle of. I know you tried to get back in time. I didn't try hard enough. You tried as hard as you could." Frank's voice was rough, But there was no accusation in it, no blame. Just the tired acceptance of a man who'd made the same choices, lived with the same regrets. That's all any of us can do. Elena didn't respond. Couldn't respond. The words were stuck somewhere behind her ribs, lodged next to the guilt she'd been carrying for 3 years. The band shifted to a slower song. Couples drifted onto the dance floor. Sarah and David swayed in the center, lost in each other, oblivious to everything else. "Dance with me." Elena blinked. "What? Dance with me?" Frank stood extending his hand. "Your mother always said I was a terrible dancer. Might as well prove her right one more time." Elena stared at her father's outstretched hand. In 30 years, she couldn't remember him ever asking her to dance. Couldn't remember him touching her, except for awkward handshakes and the occasional stiff hug. She took his hand. They moved onto the dance floor, finding a spot near the edge where they wouldn't draw too much attention. Frank's movements were exactly as advertised, stiff, uncertain, completely lacking in rhythm. But he held her carefully, like she was something precious, something fragile. "I'm proud of you," he said suddenly. Elena's step faltered. "You already said that." "I know, but I should have said it more. Should have said it every time you came home. Should have told you that what you do matters, that the sacrifices you make are worth something, that I understand why you chose this life, even if I wished you'd chosen something safer." "Dad, let me finish." His voice cracked just slightly, just enough to show the emotion he was fighting to control. "Your mother understood you better than I did. She saw the warrior in you from the time you were 5 years old. She knew you'd never be happy behind a desk, never be satisfied with a normal life. She used to say you were born for something greater." Elena's eyes burned. "I don't feel greater. I feel tired. I feel empty. I feel like I've given everything I have, and there's nothing left." "That's how I felt after my first tour." Frank's arms tightened around her. "And my second, and my third. But you know what kept me going. What? You, your sister, your mother." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes wet. "The people I loved. The people I was fighting for. They reminded me why the sacrifice mattered. They reminded me that there was something worth coming home to." "I don't have anyone waiting for me, Dad. I don't have a family. I don't have a home. I have a job, and a set of skills, and a body that's starting to break down faster than I can repair it. You have me." Frank's voice was firm. "You have Sarah. You have David now, whether you like it or not. You have this." He gestured at the reception around them, the lights, the laughter, the love filling the air. "This is your family. This is your home. And it will always be here, no matter how far you go or how long you stay away." The song ended. Father and daughter stood on the dance floor, neither moving, neither speaking. Then Elena did something she hadn't done since she was a little girl. She hugged her father. Really hugged him. Wrapped her arms around his stiff shoulders and held on like she might never let go. And he held her back. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of champagne toasts and wedding cake and embarrassing speeches from college friends. Elena smiled in the right places, laughed when laughter was expected, made small talk with relatives she barely remembered. But her mind was elsewhere. 3 days she kept thinking. 3 days until she was due back at base. 3 days until the next mission, the next operation, the next opportunity to sacrifice pieces of herself for people who would never know her name. 3 days to decide if she wanted to keep doing this, or if she wanted something different. The reception wound down around midnight. Guests filtered out hugging Sarah and David, wishing them well, stumbling toward cars and hotels. Elena helped the catering staff stack chairs, needing something to do with her hands, needing to avoid the conversations she wasn't ready to have. She was carrying a stack of tablecloths to the storage closet when she heard voices outside. "I'm just saying, did you see her, the sister? She's the one from the news. The one who stopped the hijacking." "No way. That woman looked like, I don't know, a warrior. The sister looks like any other bridesmaid." "That's what they said about her on the plane, too. Nobody saw her coming." Elena froze tablecloths, clutched to her chest. "You think it's really her?" "Has to be. Same name, same age. And did you see the way she moved? I bumped into her earlier, and she had this look, like she was cataloging every exit in the room. That's kind of terrifying. That's kind of incredible." Elena set down the tablecloths and walked away. She found Sarah in the parking lot, leaning against David's car, shoes in hand, looking exhausted and radiant at the same time. "Sneaking off?" Sarah asked. "Just needed some air." "Liar," Sarah smiled. "You're not used to being around this many people. I remember. You used to hide in your room for hours after birthday parties." "I was 7. You're still the same person, just with more muscles and more secrets." Elena leaned against the car beside her sister. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. "I heard some guests talking," she said. "About the hijacking. About me." "Yeah," Sarah sighed. "Word travels fast, especially when it involves family members saving 247 lives. I didn't want the attention. I know, but you're going to get it anyway." Sarah turned to look at her. "Is that going to be a problem for your work?" "Probably. The Navy doesn't love it when operators become public figures. Makes it harder to stay invisible." "So what happens now?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "For the first time in my career, I genuinely don't know what comes next." "Maybe that's not a bad thing." Sarah reached over and took her hand. "Maybe not knowing means you get to choose. You've spent 10 years letting the mission decide your life. Maybe it's time to decide for yourself. It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" Sarah squeezed her fingers. "You saved those people because you chose to. Nobody ordered you to stand up. Nobody commanded you to fight. You made a decision in the moment to put yourself at risk for strangers. That was you. Your choice. Your agency." Elena stared at her sister. Sometimes she forgot how perceptive Sarah could be. How much wisdom hid behind the wedding planning and the cheerful emails and the surface-level chatter. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You were just too busy saving the world to notice." They stood in comfortable silence, two sisters who'd grown up in the same house but lived in different worlds. The gap between them felt smaller now than it had in years. Still there, but bridgeable. "I want to stay," Elena said finally. "At least for a few more days. I want to spend time with you and David. I want to have dinner with Dad without feeling like we're strangers. I want to remember what it feels like to be part of a family." Sarah's eyes welled up. "Really? Really? Oh, Elena." Sarah threw her arms around her, nearly knocking them both off balance. "I've been waiting 10 years to hear you say that." 1 month later. Elena stood on the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, watching the sun set over the Atlantic. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying the salt spray of the ocean, the distant rumble of fighter jets on the flight deck. She'd made her decision. Not to leave the Navy. Not to abandon the work she'd dedicated her life to. But to change how she did it. To take on a new role training the next generation of operators, passing on the skills and knowledge she'd accumulated through a decade of combat. Admiral Harrington had been surprisingly supportive. "We need people like you to teach," he'd said during their meeting. People who've been in the fire and come out the other side. People who can show young operators what it really means to serve. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. Wasn't the endless cycle of missions and deployments and classified operations that had defined her existence since she was 22. But it was a life. A real one. With room for family, for connection, for something beyond the next target. Footsteps behind her. Elena turned. A young woman approached, early 20s, athletic build, the kind of determined expression that Elena recognized from her own reflection in basic training mirrors. Lieutenant Commander Cross. That's me. I'm Petty Officer Reeves, Jennifer Reeves. The young woman straightened, almost coming to attention. I've been assigned to your training unit. I start BUDS next month. Elena studied her. Saw the nervousness beneath the discipline, saw the hunger, the ambition, the desperate need to prove herself. First woman in your class. First woman to make it this far in my program. Others have tried. They didn't make it past Hell Week. And you think you will? Reeves hesitated. For just a moment, doubt flickered across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by steel. I know I will. Elena almost smiled. She remembered feeling that certainty, remembered channeling it through every obstacle, every challenge, every person who'd told her she couldn't. They're going to tell you that you don't belong, Elena said quietly. They're going to say you're not strong enough, not tough enough, not built for this. They're going to try to break you in ways you can't imagine. I know. Do you really understand what you're signing up for? The pain, the exhaustion, the moments when your body is screaming at you to quit and your mind is the only thing keeping you moving forward? Reeves met her gaze. With respect, ma'am, I've been told I don't belong my entire life. By teachers, by coaches, by every man who looked at me and saw weakness instead of potential. I didn't believe them then. I won't believe them now. Elena nodded slowly. Good. Hold on to that. Because when you're face down in the surf zone at 3 a.m, shivering so hard you can't remember your own name, that belief is the only thing that's going to get you through. Yes, ma'am. And Reeves, ma'am. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The note from Margaret and Thomas Wilson. The one that had called her the best of them. When they tell you that women can't be SEALs, when they look at you like you're an anomaly, or a mistake, or a diversity quota, remember this. The people who underestimate you are giving you the greatest advantage you'll ever have. They won't see you coming. They won't be ready for what you can do. And by the time they realize their mistake, it'll be too late. She pressed the paper into Reeves's hand. What's this? A reminder. From someone who learned the same lesson the hard way. Reeves unfolded the paper, read the words, looked up with something shining in her eyes. You are the best of us, she whispered. Not just me. Elena turned back toward the sunset, toward the endless horizon that had been her home for a decade. All of us. Every woman who refused to be told what she couldn't do. Every soldier who fought through pain that should have broken her. Every operator who walked into darkness and brought the light with her. She looked at Reeves one last time. That's who we are. That's what we do. And as long as women like you keep stepping forward, keep demanding the chance to prove themselves, the world will never be able to ignore us again. Reeves straightened. Something had changed in her posture. Something had hardened in her eyes. I won't let you down, ma'am. I know you won't. Elena watched the young woman walk away, spine straight, shoulders back, already carrying herself like the warrior she would become. And for the first time in years, Elena Cross felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not for herself. Not for her career, or her legacy, or the missions she would never complete. but for the future. For the young women who would follow in her footsteps. For the operators who would carry forward the lessons she'd learned through blood and sacrifice and more pain than anyone should have to bear. She thought about the hijacking. About the 247 passengers who'd gone home to their families because she'd been on that flight. About Richard Holbrook, who'd hugged his wife for 10 minutes straight when he walked through his front door. About the elderly couple, Margaret and Thomas, who'd sent her a letter every week since the incident, updating her on their grandchildren, their garden, their quiet life in Virginia. She thought about Sarah's wedding, about her father's arms around her, about the feeling of belonging to something larger than herself, something that couldn't be measured in mission reports or kill counts. She thought about the choice she'd made on that aircraft, the moment she'd stood up unarmed against 3 men with weapons and a plan, the moment she'd decided that her life was worth less than the lives of strangers. That moment had changed everything, not because it had made her a hero, not because it had earned her medals or recognition or a place in the history books, but because it had reminded her why she'd started this journey in the first place: to protect, to serve, to stand between innocent people and the darkness that wanted to consume them. That was her purpose. That had always been her purpose. And now, as she stood on the deck of an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, she knew that purpose would continue, not through her own hands, but through the hands of the women and men she would train, through the operators who would carry her lessons into battles she would never see, through the next generation, and the generation after that, and every generation that followed. The sun disappeared below the horizon. Elena Cross, Lieutenant Commander, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, closed her eyes and breathed. She had saved 247 lives. She had reunited with her family. She had found a new purpose. And tomorrow, she would begin the next chapter. Because warriors don't retire. They evolve. They adapt. They pass on everything they've learned to those who will carry the fight forward. And in the end, that legacy, not the missions, not the medals, not the moments of violence and sacrifice, that legacy is what truly matters. Elena opened her eyes. The stars were beginning to emerge, scattered across the darkening sky like promises. She smiled, and for the first time in 10 years, she felt ready. Ready to live. Ready to teach. Ready to become something more than just a weapon. Because the woman who had saved Flight 1093 was not defined by that single act of heroism. She was defined by every choice she had ever made and every choice she would make from this moment forward. And those choices, all of them, led to the same truth. Elena Cross was exactly who she was meant to be.